WebAdMIT is really the heart and soul of this presentation. It's a free online application management software designed to bring all applicant data to the fingertips of the residency director and the program staff. So WebAdMIT is your view into OPRESCAS. OPRESCAS is the perspective held by the people who are applying to do a residency. And, well, at the end of the day, it's a tool that places all the information about each residency candidate into a convenient location. You could see their grades. You can see their letters of recommendation. You can see their experience in one PDF. And the nice thing is it can be customized to match each residency program selection process, because some residency programs have a very structured rubric for selections, while others are a little bit more focused on particular qualities of the candidate. It's going to really depend a little bit. Now, let's keep moving along, because WebAdMIT actually comes in two flavors, and these two flavors matter for the first time ever. There's pre-launch and traditional WebAdMIT, and both of these environments are part of WebAdMIT, the way that you interact with the OPRESCAS applications. Pre-launch, this is the version of WebAdMIT used to begin configuring an existing program for a current cycle. So this is where you'll actually update and say, we're looking for people to apply on such and such a date. And by the way, we want to update our info about who our program director is. You can also create a new program for the current cycle. So for example, if you've only hosted orthotic residencies the last 3 years and suddenly you're thinking, we have enough prosthetic patients that we could do a prosthetic residency too, you can create a new program using pre-launch as well. And the link to access that is prelaunch.webadmit.org. And don't worry, it's in your inbox. Actually, Ms. Marshall's already emailed you twice. On that note, good old WebAdMIT, something that many of you are familiar with because you've been using WebAdMIT for a long time. Traditional WebAdMIT, which you go to webadmit.org, is used to view applicants for the programs that you've configured via pre-launch. So once you've built the program out and said, we're looking for someone, WebAdMIT is the interface that you're going to use to actually look at those applications and also add new users to your organization. Because depending on your organization size, you may need to add folks from human resources or other mentors who are going to be helping you decide, is this individual a good candidate or not? Now, for those of you that might not be as seasoned, and I know I have some really seasoned users of the system and some not as much, I want to give you some of the ABCs, if you will, of WebAdMIT, some of the definitions, because the language used within the Common App Service and WebAdMIT is a tiny bit different than what you might be familiar with the NCOPE residency standards. So WebAdMIT has something called an organization, and this is an O&P company, and it could actually represent multiple NCOPE accredited residency sites. So the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs is a single organization, but they have 20 unique residency programs housed underneath that one organization. And some of you are in the private sector and have a large number of residency programs under a single organization. Now, a residency program is an individual program type and location that an organization wishes to advertise. So for example, the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, Hines 12-month orthotic residency, because Hines is the local hospital here in the Chicago Metro, and they're looking for 12-month orthotic residents. That may be one of their programs, but they also may have the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, Puget Sound 12-month prosthetic residency. And Danny, the residency director up there, oversees that program, even though it's 2 time zones away. But that program and the one here in Chicago are under the same organization. So if you're part of a larger company, like one that may be held by the OSER or one that might be held by Kenny Orthotics and Prosthetics, they have multiple sites that are all going to go under a single organization. Now, I want to do a quick case study because the question I get asked a lot is, how many programs should I configure? So Boston O&P wishes to hire one 18-month combined O&P resident for their Richmond office, and also one 12-month orthotic resident for their Richmond office as well. They also want to hire 2 12-month orthotic residents for their primary Boston, Massachusetts location. So how many programs need to be configured? Because it looks like they're going to hire 4 residents between 2 different cities, but there's some variations in the programs. Let's talk about what the answer is. It's actually going to be 3 total. So for Richmond, you need to have 2 programs because a combined residency and orthotic residency are 2 different program types. So you need to advertise each separately. But for Boston, where you're only offering a single discipline, orthotic residency, and that's it, you can actually have 17 applicants and pick 3, 4, 5 people from that pool to fill that 12-month orthotic residency in Boston. So we'd actually need to configure 3 unique programs here. And this is a pretty common example. Now, keep in mind, those of you that are thinking, wait a second, I have to build 3 applications? Not really. Actually, WebAdMIT makes it really easy to make a duplicate, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, the big question we get is, where do I perform configurations? And this is the big difference from previous years. WebAdMIT pre-launch CAS configuration portal. This is the only place that you can create your configurations. So what you're going to do is go to prelaunch.webadmit.org. You're going to scroll down to administration on the left-hand side and choose CAS configuration portal. Then you'll choose the configuration portal button, and it's going to open up in a new tab in your browser. And you want to make sure your pop-up blocker is disabled, because it's possible that it's going to try to open up and your browser might not let it happen. So if you click the button and go, it's broke, odds are you're just blocking the pop-up. So on that note, I want to give you a little bit of a tour, because, well, if you're anything like I was in school, I'd do much better with hands-on learning than just PowerPoint presentations. So let's go ahead and hop in to our pre-launch environment. So when you log into the pre-launch environment, it's going to look exactly the same as WebAdMIT. And within pre-launch, you also may get a little panicked initially, because you may think, oh my gosh, I have no applications. This is not going well. But pre-launch isn't the place you view applications. Pre-launch is the place where you build applications. So we're going to do what I just talked about on the last slide. I'm going to click Management, and I'm going to go down to CAS Configuration Portal and click OPRESCAS. And it's going to automatically highlight the current open cycle. So when you use pre-launch, you don't have to remember, gosh, when do I want to advertise a position? Your options are going to be somewhat limited, and that's not a bad thing. And then it'll identify the company that you work at, in this case, Comprehensive Prosthetics and Orthotics. And without further ado, we can see that we have some information already populated into the system. So if you're a seasoned user of WebAdMIT, well, the good news is all your effort didn't just automatically disappear. So for example, the dual discipline residency in Peoria is one of the busier residency sites within this clinical organization. So I'm going to hover over my little pencil and hit details. And what's pretty cool is we can actually hover over these little teeny eyeballs and see, what's my application look like? So Ms. Boomer actually already did a little bit of build out, and she has information. She's got a company logo. She's got some branding, and she's already built things out to accept things like resumes, for example. So all the effort that you put in the last year, it's still there. Don't worry. Now, some of you may be brand new users. So I'm going to go back to my organization right here. And if you're a brand new user, you may need to create a program from scratch. And I want to show you how to do that. So I'm going to click Add a Program. And I'm going to create our residency program. So without further ado, let's call this our 12-month orthotic residency for the Brookfield location. And Brookfield, at the end of the day, is one of the many locations they have within the metropolitan area. It's also the home to the second largest zoo in the United States. The WebAdMIT name is an internal term that you can use. So if you're a prosthetist, orthotist, you probably like abbreviations and acronyms. So you can do something like 12-month, OX, Res, Brookfield, Summer, because you want to, identify what it means to you. But everything in this little box, your candidate won't see. So we're going to go ahead and type in our city and our state and our zip code, 60520. Now let's talk about open date and deadlines. So your open date is the very first day that you want to start accepting resumes for individuals. So if I click on my open date here, let's imagine that we want to start taking applications for individuals, right around September 15, 2021. And the deadline is when you'll stop taking applications. So that date has to be after the open date. So let's imagine we want all of our applications in by October 1st. Now you have the option to display the deadline. You actually could show to the candidates, October 1st, That's a hard and fast stop. You can't apply after that. Or if you like to work with the procrastinators a little bit, I like to put in different date. And we're going to actually show those individuals that our application is closing on September 28th. So that way they could still turn it in if they started it until October 1st. But the system's going to show you really should turn it in by the 28th. So that's a nice way to make sure people get things together. Now, on that note, if you're at a clinical site where you're thinking, you know what, we're actually happy to keep taking applications anytime until the position's filled, you can just click rolling. And that will actually show the candidate you have rolling applications. And if you want to leave it wide open until the very end of a cycle, we could go and say, you know what, let's just keep it wide open until July 30th next year. And if we get a great applicant, we can close the application early. Now, at the end of the day, we have our residency start date. Your start date is when you want the resident to actually show up in your clinic to start working. So if you wanted them to start July 1st, summer one's a pretty good choice. And these terms here are academic terms, so they might be a little confusing if you don't work at a university, and I don't blame you. So winter is January through March. Spring is April through June. Summer is July 1st through the middle of August. Summer 2 is the middle of August through the end of September. Fall is October through December and rolling. Well, that means they could start working whenever they're available to. There's some flexibility there, which isn't a bad thing. Now, we're talking about starting year. Starting year is a year that, again, the resident wants to start their employment. So if we wanted to start in the summer of 2022, well, this is a good place to go. Now for your program type, I think we said we were going to make this an orthotic residency, and you can pick clinical track, which is by far the most common. Now, if you're at a residency site that's approved to do research track, you could pick clinical and or research, or you could say just research track. So I know, for example, University of California, San Francisco has a couple of residencies where you can only do research. But I'm going to pick clinical because that's the most common track for the organization I'm doing my demo for. So I went ahead and I hit my save button, and what you can see is the one that I've already started building will show up at the very bottom. And I can hit my details again, my little pencil to edit it. You have to hover your mouse. And we can see it's kind of a boring application. It doesn't look quite like the one that Ellie built out, but that's pretty easy to fix. So in order to actually get this looking a little bit better, we have a couple of moves. First of all, I'm going to go to branding. Now you can upload a custom graphic, and that's what Ellie's graphics team did. They gave her a picture that was exactly this size. So if you have a marketing person or a graphics person, you say, I need an image 900 px by 270 px. They know what that means, don't worry. So you can upload your own custom image, which Ellie did. But really the key here isn't so much as a pretty image, as getting the right info. So what I did is I clicked edit instructions, and right now there's no instructions for our candidates. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, what do they mean by instructions? This is your place to convince your candidates that you're giving them all the info they need to know. And I can tell you, there's 10 questions candidates are going to ask about your residency program, and it's right here on OPRESCAS, information to share with candidates. I'm going to go ahead and copy it. I'm going to go right into my configuration portal, and I'm going to just paste that as plain text. And the cool thing about it is this is what's called a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get. So I'm going to go through now and work my way through to each one of these questions. And the nice thing about it is, since it's like Word, you can just make a little bullet right here. What patient populations are facility served? You know, we specialize in pediatrics. But you can go through and answer each one of these questions and hit your save button. And the nice thing about it is if I go back to program details and click my eyeball, now we're starting to share information with the candidates, because the key is if you have an application where the only thing you share is the contact phone number and email address for the residency director, they're going to call you up a lot until you tell them everything they want to know about the site before they apply. On that note, it's pretty easy to just post the answers to the questions that I listed, and I would really strongly encourage you to do that. Now, the other thing that Ellie did a great job with, and I want to share with you, is documents. So documents down here, well, we work with that by clicking the thing called editor at the very top. When I click editor, I can put a little tick mark right next to the word documents and click it. And you can go in here and actually just provide some basic info. Please provide the following documents. And then in order to actually request it, you have to hit request a document. I'm going to pick resume. You definitely want a resume, and I recommend making it 1 your minimum required and make 1 your maximum allowed. Otherwise, you might actually get 7 different resumes that relate to different experiences. This is my resume from undergrad. This is my O&P resume. But I like to just be very specific. Provide your current resume that best reflects your O&P qualifications, education, and experience. So that's a pretty direct statement that we got there. And if I hit my save button, I can go right back to my program details. And you remember those little eyeballs? I got 2 of them now. I got 1 under documents. And you can see this is exactly what the candidate's going to be prompted for. They can see this information. Now, on that note, I'm going to actually go back to one of the applications that Ms. Boomer was working in, because she did a nice job finishing some of that build out. So I'm going to go back to my organization. You see, here's all the ones that we had. And we looked at this dual discipline one for Peoria. And if I hit details, we can go ahead and tweak this so that it's appropriate for the upcoming year. So I can go ahead and hit my edit button and make sure that it's set to open up, and it'll automatically transpose the years that we're looking for. So we already can see that it's been set to match the November 19th and June 26th as was done previously, but the years have been moved forward. But here's a chance to tweak things. So if, let's say Ellie decided, you know what, I want people to apply sooner. I want to start getting applications October 15th because I want to get offers out before other folks. And that way, well, we don't have to worry about looking for applicants. And by May 1st, they'll be hired. They'll be ready to go. So we can hit our save button. And assuming that Ellie was happy with everything that she liked, and she can always click her eyeballs and double check that all the information here is correct. The one thing that some folks forget, but I know Ellie doesn't because she's actually got a good number of applications, is submit for review. And then you hit the submit button. So right now, hopefully everybody can see that I have my cycle screen. So I've been using this term a little bit. I want to make sure we're on the same page. What's meant by a cycle and how does it affect the residency programs? So a cycle spans 1 calendar year and normally runs August 26th through August of the subsequent calendar year. And programs must be configured for each cycle. And the information from the previous cycle is copied over to make posting easier. As I demonstrated, we were able to look at all the beautiful stuff that Ellie shared. Now, cycles reflect the period of time when a unique version of WebAdMIT and OPRESCAS are rolled out to applicants and residency sites. And there's been some upgrades. And actually, I'm going to have a chance to have Ms. Marshall take a little bit of a tour of what those upgrades are in just a moment. What I'd like to do is answer some more questions. I want to dig a little bit deeper because regarding cycles, we've got some good follow-up questions from individuals. And I'm glad that Michelle tossed that one question my way because I actually am going to touch upon it. So a lot of folks go, when can I advertise a residency position during a cycle? And residency positions can be added and made visible to candidates at any time during the cycle. But this must be done using WebAdMIT pre-launch. So if you go into webadmit.org and not the pre-launch environment, you're not going to be able to actually list and advertise new positions. You have to go into pre-launch regardless of what time it is during the year. On that note, what's cool about pre-launch is programs can be configured before the cycle even opens up. So August 26th is when our cycle is going to be opening up this year, but you'll be able to actually access pre-launch before then. You'll be able to configure for residents that you're looking to have apply between August 26, 2021 through the summer of 2022. You'll be able to configure that earlier. So before the system's even available is what's neat about pre-launch and doing it this way. Now, this relates a little bit to what Michelle was getting at. My clinic does not hire a resident year over year. Do I need to do anything if we don't plan to hire this cycle? And at the end of the day, if you're absolutely sure that you're not going to offer a residency position during the current cycle, then your clinic has no responsibility to advertise a residency position on OPRESCAS. And at the end of the day, NCOPE and the applicants appreciate it when a clinic doesn't list a position on OPRESCAS that you have no intention of filling. You don't want to be in a situation of false advertising where you're listing all these opportunities that you actually don't intend to fill. That's frustrating for all parties involved. So if you're confident, I'm not going to be hiring a resident anytime between August 26th of 2021 through the summer of 2022. I look forward to chatting with you next summer when Megan and I will give you the updates and the new system upgrades. So if that's your situation, that's okay. Now, Michelle's case is a situation where the residents are retained. They generally do a 12-month residency in one discipline and then the other. I know that's pretty common. That's a cool thing in my opinion. So I want to get to that, but let's talk a little bit more about timing, because cycles and timing are important. They're related. Now, when do the O&P students graduate, and when should I consider posting opportunities? So I can show you, here's the graduation dates for all accredited O&P schools. Loma Linda, March. They're the first one in the calendar year. April, that's a big one. That's when you have ASU, Eastern Michigan, Northwestern, and Pitt. May, Cal State and Hartford. June, Concordia and UW. And December, FIU/IIOP and University of Texas Southwestern. So they're kind of scattered throughout. And if you look at the graduate numbers from the schools, UT Southwestern and IIOP, if they're both operating at full capacity, are going to have about 36 graduates. So if there's a month where the most people come into the profession, it's going to be April, because ASU and Eastern Michigan, that's going to give you 40 people. Northwestern's another, so that's 88 people plus 24, 116 graduates in April alone. So something to be mindful of is that's when you're going to see a lot of people come out of the gate. So how do you time your applications? Because I could tell you, candidates are actively seeking residency opportunities 6 to 9 months before they graduate. So many of you probably attended certificate level education. I did. And heck, 6 to 9 months before I started my certificate, I wasn't in school. It was only 22 weeks long. But the master's students are looking 6 to 9 months before they graduate. So somebody that's attending Cal State University and graduating in May, they're actually going to really get their resumes polished up September 1st. And they're going to be logged in to the OPRESCAS portal and looking for people that open up their apps right away. So something to think about. I can also tell you that many students, regardless of the school, have offers extended to them by January 31st. So if you're at a clinical site where you're thinking, you know what, we don't even think about hiring a resident this year until February or March, depends what our accountant says. Keep in mind, you're going to have a lot of people who already have job offers in hand. So it might be a little bit on the late side. Now, one other question I'm asked an awful lot, and Michelle, I'm getting to your question, I do promise, but I'm submitted my configuration so I could begin accepting applications. I hit the submit button, which is what I showed you how to do right as my screen turned off. How do I make sure it's visible to candidates? And at the end of the day, it's easy. Just go to webadmit.org. And if it's configured and approved, it's going to be copied over to the plain WebAdMIT system, webadmit.org. And you'll see approved to the right-hand side of the organization. So it'll be nice big green letters. On that note, if you didn't actually submit the configuration, you might see something called draft if you're within the pre-launch environment. Or you might see closed because you had the application, it opened up, and then it slammed its door shut. We're past the day where you're actually willing to receive additional applications. So this information is listed right within the configuration portal. Now, let's talk a little bit more about other things that pop up a lot. I get folks who say, I know my application's visible. I saw that it's actually approved, but I don't have any applicants. Is WebAdMIT broken? And to that, I say no. Most of the time, you just need to turn on your view of the actual program assignment. So if you click on Account, which is at the top right-hand side of your screen, click Edit My Account, you can put a check mark right next to the respective organizations that you want to view the applications for. And the BCP group and the respective Oster clinics, well, they got a lot of applications open. So you'll see they have their Nashville, Tennessee office, both orthotics and prosthetics. They're separate programs, and they should be separate programs. So Renee's able to turn them all on and view them, and Renee provides educational oversight for the entire infrastructure that represents the OSER clinics, if you will. Now, this actually gets at the root of Michelle's question. It's a really good one. I plan to have my current orthotic residents stay on to do their prosthetic residency. Do they need to apply via OPRESCAS? And if you do not plan to offer any other prosthetic residency positions and there's no possibility of hiring additional prosthetic residents, then no, your current orthotic resident transitioning doesn't need to apply via OPRESCAS. They do need to register with NCOPE, however. So I have a couple of residents who go, yeah, I'm sticking around. Started my prosthetic residency yesterday. And I asked, did you register? And they go, I got to register? It's like, yeah, you got to register again. So make sure they do that. But OPRESCAS isn't necessary if that's your situation. Now, alternatively, if you plan on offering a prosthetic residency and you want to hire the best possible applicant, and you encourage your current resident to apply, but you'll take the best applicant. It might not be your current resident. You might have somebody who shows up, applies, and they blow your current one out of the water. Then you need to advertise a position on OPRESCAS. Now, what's neat about this is this applies to current employees as well, because I know a few of you work at organizations where you have individuals employed as a technician, for example, and they're doing a blended learning program like Concordia University, where they're working remotely and then they only go on campus very short periods of time throughout the year. So if you have a current technician, for example, and they're finishing up O&P school, they're going to be done on June 10th. Well, June 11th, they could start their residency. And if you have no intention of hiring anybody besides your current technician who's going to be a resident real soon, please don't advertise that on OPRESCAS because you're not willing to consider other people. You've already offered the job. So for the current employees, and if nobody else is competing for that spot and you're going to hire them no matter what, don't advertise it on OPRESCAS. Now, this goes back to a question that I had from Kate earlier on. Our organization has 10 unique residency sites, so I need to post a configuration for each one, and the simple answer is yes. You do need to post a configuration for each site seeking a resident. So Kate's organization has sites dotted all along the West Coast and over into Colorado. And every one that you plan to place a resident at, she needs to be advertised because NCOPE and the schools and the professional organizations need to know the geographic regions that are seeking residents. So if Kate only advertised one position, I'm only going to advertise the one in the Bay Area of California because that's our nice location. We don't need to tell them about Fresno. And if you've ever been to Fresno, you know why I'm saying that. But on that note, you need to advertise all the locations where that resident might be placed, where you're looking to have the residents actually be situated. So advertising an opportunity in just one location and then filling a position in a different state or metropolitan area, because California is pretty big. Well, at the end of the day, it prevents NCOPE from capturing the data necessary to inform our organization and the profession. And Kate, yeah, the physical office location in Fresno is nice. You are correct. Thank you. So those are some of my big FAQs. But one thing I wanted to touch upon real fast is I'm actually going to back up my slides a few for Ms. Marshall. Because one of the things I wanted to actually have Ms. Marshall cover is just what's new and exciting in WebAdMIT, because we're now on version 6.0, and we've had some updates and upgrades. So without further ado, Megan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. So what we can cover today is some of the new features that we have in within the configuration portal. It's basically just going to allow you to introduce some more configurability if that's something that you'd like to do. Chris, if you're talking about the actual WebAdMIT release, I can also send those notes. But I think it might be helpful to go through these new features within that editor section. Does that sound like a plan?
Sure. Do you want to do a little bit of screen share and I'll turn mine off?
Sounds good.
All right, go for it.
All righty. Here we are. And let me move my screen. Would you guys like me to go back into the configuration portal from here?
Sure.
Okay, we'll just do it. So, and Chris, I'm using your account. I always use Chris's account. All right, so we're going to log into our pre-launch WebAdMIT account. Make sure you see this pre-launch here. This is where we're going to be setting up the programs. Under Management tab here, click the CAS Configuration Portal. We're going to see OPRESCAS. Now here you see some previous cycles because Chris has been around the block for a while. He's been in previous cycles here. But if you guys probably won't see more than one, but just this bottom one here. We're going to click on our site and I'm going to click details. Now we have our tabs up here where we're going to be configuring each section. If you go to editor here, we have the evaluations questions documents. And then up here, this is what's new here. We have what's called rules builder. So if you go here to rules builder and then we click add rule, these are our options. So the first one, question visibility. This is basically going to hide a question unless certain conditions are met. So as an example, in my questions section, I ask, have you ever been expelled and why? If you haven't been expelled, I don't need to know why. So we're going to go with the question that you don't need to see unless the condition is met. And that's this one, which is why, because some people don't need to answer this, right? So we'll see here the question, hide this by default and show when conditions are met. So we go to continue here, add condition. And I'm going to say, okay, I only want this why to be required if you have been expelled, because I want to know what was going on there. And then you would just save, and you know it's saved when you see this box here. And I can't see the chat box here, so feel free to yell out or let me know to check the chat if you guys have any questions. I'll just pause for a second.
No questions yet.
Cool. Alrighty, next we have conditional answer options. So maybe based on the way a candidate answers a question, you only want to see certain answer options for another question. So I know that sounds a little confusing, so let me just show you my example. Here we have the affected question. So this is going to be, so the question, change available answer options based on the way the linked question is answered. So let's say, now I have here degree and major. This is really just an example to illustrate how the feature works. We do ask for degree and major in the core of the application. So this wouldn't specifically be something you have to add. But let's say, let me just, there we go. I'm going to go back in just a minute, guys. Let me just, okay, let me go back here, guys.
Is that fixed? Can you grab his leg?
Alrighty, so the affected question, I selected major because based on the degree they select, there are certain majors that aren't going to be available for that degree. The linked question is the answer to this question is going to indicate what you see for major. So depending on what they answer for degree, they're going to see certain options, only certain options for major. We go continue here. This is where we say if the answer, if they indicate that their degree is Master of Science, they're only going to see physics. They don't need music because if it's Master of Science, it's not going to be music. then what I can also do is say, if they answer Master of Arts, they're only going to see music, because that's really the only degree that works with this, only major that works with this degree. So I know your head might be spinning a little bit, and to be honest, you don't have to use these features, but they are available if, you know, if this is making you guys think of anything like, oh, I could do this, and then, you know, it's an option, but don't worry if you don't really need these. Another good one is program availability. Now we use this sometimes just to kind of weed out candidates who really aren't eligible for the program. So you can basically add a question and say, you know, have you, you know, received your O&P degree or something of that sort. And if they indicate yes, then they would get a message saying your program is not available because they don't allow this, basically. So we can say the program is unavailable if, you know, or maybe, hey, maybe it's unavailable if they've been expelled, you know, maybe that would be a reason to let them know that maybe, you know, maybe you don't want them to apply. And we would just name the rules. So I'd say, you know.
And a good example of when we might want to use this is there's a handful of residency sites that only want second discipline residents. So you're in a situation where you say, we have a prosthetic residency, but we only want you to apply if you're already a certified orthotist. So that's where this logic can be really handy, is you could only advertise that prosthetic position and actually allow them to apply to the prosthetic program if they identify that, oh, I'm already a certified orthotist.
Thank you, Chris. That's a much better example. So once you set this up here, you just click continue, and then you can actually put in what you want to say to this candidate. So basically, you know, what Chris just said, unfortunately, this is, you know, this program is only eligible for blah, 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 blah. So a fun feature. And then the last one I would like to show you guys is show document. Now, this is tied to the program questions. So we can make it so that based on the way that they answer a question, it's going to require a document. So an example I can use is, say, it's someone who attended their O&P school outside the US or something. You can say, maybe I want another document if they say that they're international. And then in the document section, you can say, you know, upload your foreign O&P transcript or something like that. But if someone indicates that they're not, they didn't attend a foreign O&P school, then they wouldn't see this document because it's not applicable to them.
Cool. And this logic tool is very nuanced. You can do a lot with it. And I recognize if you're a clinical site where you're thinking, we have 2 offices, Chris, I can't see a use case. It's possible that you won't have it situated. But if you're in a setting like the VA or an organization that has 10, 15 offices, there's actually some unique ways to do this. And it's probably a good segue. Mind if I steal the screen back from you, Megan?
Absolutely.
So one thing that we can help you out with is basically what I like to call concierge configurations, if you will. So we covered a lot of ground. There's a lot of tutorials out there. When you log into the WebAdMIT portal, you'll see that there's a big help section and videos and all sorts of things. But getting it set up the first time isn't always the easiest thing to do. And that's where Megan and I are happy to help you out. So we will do one-on-one consultations with individuals to get things set up. I've actually set up configurations with many of you who are on this call. So if it was a positive experience, well, feel free to share that in the chat window and The other thing that I wanted to touch upon, because we actually had a really good question pop up during the Q&A. So they said, well, we've always taken residency applications just directly to us. That's actually how a lot of sites work. But when OPRESCAS became a requirement in 2017, it's actually, you've been required to use it for several years. And NCOPE hasn't been punitive about sites not using it. But I can tell you the resident review committee in general is not supportive of violations of the residency standards. So in just the past year, we've had a few residency programs violate the standards, not in particular to not using OPRESCAS, but that is something that they would actually be the group that would adjudicate. They'd make a ruling on it. And what's happened is residency sites have had the requirement that they need to have their accreditation period shortened. So a 3-year cycle for accreditation may be cut down to 1 year or 2 years, or they may limit the number of residents that your organization is allowed to take if they determine you violated the standard. So using OPRESCAS is really something that is a steadfast requirement. The other thing that's happening is also within our applications, or excuse me, registration forms for residents. One of the next steps is the registration forms in the not too distant future are going to include, what is your OPRESCAS ID? The resident will actually have to enter that information in. And if they don't have an OPRESCAS ID, because they're the current resident, like let's say it's Michelle's situation, they're already an orthotic resident and they're sticking around for their prosthetic residency, they'll be able to enter in what's known as their resident ID, which they're provided in their first residency. But anybody that's not a current employee, they're not going to be able to provide you with either a resident ID or a OPRESCAS ID. So they won't be able to finish the registration form, unfortunately, because they're going to need one of those two fields. So residents that are sticking around, they're going to use their resident ID right outside of NCOPE tracker. It's something that's visible to them. And their OPRESCAS ID is also readily visible to them if they're applying through OPRESCAS as they need to. So that's going to be the upcoming situation, is it is a steadfast requirement. It's not something that we're happy to ask nicely, and I sincerely want you to use it, but please do recognize if you don't use it, we do have an obligation to uphold our own requirements and standards. So please be mindful of that as well. So on that note, we do have a couple of minutes left. And let's see, I'm just going through our questions. Oh, and that's right. Michelle actually brought up an interesting point. So within her clinical setting, and then actually the clinical setting that I'm affiliated with, I work at Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, we have a really pretty amazing HR process in play. And it's hard to sit there and think you're going to one up and do better than the HR process that your hospital has in place. On that note, what we do is we have OPRESCAS set up within the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab as a screening tool. We essentially have people apply with OPRESCAS and we'll get 60 applications because we offer 4 positions every year. And of those 60 applications, we'll actually take the top 10 people and have them complete the HR process. And our HR folks love it because they don't have to process all 60 people anymore. They only got to process our top 10 candidates. And then we're able to narrow it down to our final 4 chosen residents. So OPRESCAS actually is a very nice course filter, if you will. And then you can continue to leverage your built-in internal processes because there's a lot of you that work at organizations that have beautiful HR resources. Mary Freebed actually has a really nice HR platform in place. But if we were to set it up in a way that you'd have your top picks finish the HR process, but your broader applicant pool would start through OPRESCAS, you'd be actually able to, 1, capture more applicants, because if you list on OPRESCAS, more people are going to know you're hiring. And 2, if you actually are able to drive that list down, you don't actually have to send so many people to HR, which I'm sure your HR team will appreciate. So on that note, we've got about 2 minutes left for some Q&A. So if you do have any other questions, you're welcome to instant message them. Or alternatively, I actually have it set that I believe you can unmute your microphones if you'd like. You could just share your voice if you'd like. But Megan and I are here to answer your questions. And I'm just going to click to my last slide so that you can see our direct email addresses as well, because that's probably the best way to track us down at any given time. Thank you for your time.